everybody, it's T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Oracle of Self. Today we're going to finish up the interpretation of the exploration we've been working on recently on building relationships that matter. We've worked our way through the top 9 of those activities, and that leaves us with 3 remaining to explore. And so this one we'll start off with number 10, respecting each other's need for personal space and boundaries, respecting each other's needs for personal space and boundaries. And so we kind of said, well, we're on the change grid. Are you going to do the best job of respecting other people's needs or just respecting other people in general? And we chose the driven analytical driver. So definitely a driver because it's something doing. Respecting is not a passive verb necessarily. There is an active part of the whole thing where you're consciously deciding to respect other people. You're thinking twice before you would say or do anything that wasn't respectful. And yeah, maybe at a certain point in time, it just becomes, or respect becomes just part of the fabric of the relationship that you have. So it doesn't demand any conscious attention so much. But nevertheless, it's still there and it's something you've decided to do and you're doing it. The moment we use that word do, we're talking about the driver energy as being predominant. So even if you do have one of those very harmonious relationships that exist inside the green circle, there's still a little bit of an outgrid lean when it comes to something like respecting other people's, what do we say, boundaries and whatever it was. And so that's why I put that one right there as our targeted location, a little bit of a driven, amiable driver. Kind of thing. Yep. Making sure it happens, honoring it, all along. Interestingly enough, the average person in our little population here has plotted where this triangle is. And so that's darn close to the ideal location. In fact, pretty much all of you are within 1, maybe 2 points of being in that ideal location. And so from a training perspective or a coaching perspective, this grid would not suggest that any real intervention is necessary. So if you were pressed for time, again, if you were using this with a client and you do have limited time, this is not one that I would say you'd want to put a big spotlight on right away. If you have all the time that you want to have, well, fine. Sooner or later, get around to it just to see what it is that you can do with this particular plotting. The one thing that I would say you guys can all walk away from with this is that you seem to be very natural at respecting other people's needs. And hopefully that also means that your boundaries are also being respected by the people that are around you. Individual F, yeah, it made their ability 2 points higher. I'm glad you feel very strong in your ability to respect others. That's really, really excellent. And only individual B, Brian, that's you, found it ever so slightly more challenging. Because remember, this ideal location says the challenge is innate. I'm not suggesting to anyone that respecting another person's boundaries is effortless. It's not, because you've got your own thoughts, your own biases, your own feelings, et cetera, that are going to come into play. And so maybe some days respecting another individual is easier than other days. And maybe it's subject specific. It's easier to respect people on certain subjects and not so much on other subjects. Thoughts about that before I throw some scenarios at you?
Yeah, I think that for me is it's a little bit tough dealing with certain people with this because there's so many variables to it that I may not be aware of. And so I may overstep my boundaries on some cases, especially if they're harming themselves or I feel like they're positioning to harm themselves. So like for me, when I'm thinking about these, oftentimes it's a personal scenario that
Yes.
often comes up. And so then I'm thinking from that perspective. And so like I was thinking a perspective like patients that, right, the word patients, people, when you're trying to help them become more healthy, but they don't seem to get it. And so I might ask questions or say something that really overstep the boundaries for them because they're just not ready to hear it or they're not ready to receive it or whatever the case is. And that makes it difficult.
Right. And so, we can certainly explore that because just like um, how do I, the respect is a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're coming along and we've got advice, we have insights, we have some sort of passion that's trying to direct another individual and what they choose to do in their life, how they choose to go about doing it, they may perceive that as being very disrespectful to their boundaries.
Right,
And
right,
so it really
exactly.
is kind of this is what I'm saying. It's like we can't say that there's no real challenge to it. There's this constant, I want to say, exercise in modulating whatever it is you're thinking and feeling and staying receptive to what they may be thinking and feeling.
You said a word earlier that I think would be a salient point for me to take away from this, and that's being more conscious of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, I started a not for profit in the US with a fellow that I went to, did an MBA program with, and it's called the Black Men's Health Alliance. So, we're doing like this health literacy and was working with this guy. So, we are doing this training, and he said something, I don't remember, my response to it triggered him because he said, well, damn it, I'm doing the best that I can do.
Right.
Literally, that's what he said. So
Yeah.
then, I was like, okay, well, the best that you're doing in terms of evidence is not getting you the results. So is there something else you can do? But
Mhm.
that was overstepping for him.
Right. And what you were hearing, and even the words that he chose, was an upgrade reaction
Mm-hmm.
to what was really going on. For someone to be upgrid, he had to be feeling some element of anger, grief, fear, or shame. So we know there's lots of variations on those, but as you move further and further upgrade, those are the emotions that are going to become more and more prevalent. So was it coming out of a place of anger? If it was coming out of a place of anger, you guys all know this, anger and something else walk hand in hand. So what is it that triggers people to display, feel anger?
Fear.
Nope, 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 nope,
No?
nope, 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 nope. Fear, that's what fear's got its own cold issues. But anger and something walk hand in hand. And I know I've said that phrase thousands of times, so I'm hoping
You
someone on the call
did. That's why I'm
remember.
I'm trying to
Is it
remember.
Kathy? Go ahead. Just saw Kathy. There she is. Yeah.
Would you
So
say that again,
yeah,
T, only because I was on mute and I was trying to answer and so I didn't hear.
right there you go. Anger and something walk hand in hand.
Yeah, I was going to say shame.
Yeah, me too.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I think you guys are touching into the right thing. Just keep in mind that both fear and shame are separate core emotions, and so they've got their own stuff going on with it. But the phrase that I've always used was anger and pain walk hand in hand.
Ah, got it.
So
Yeah,
whenever
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's variations, but nevertheless, whenever someone feels physically, emotionally, or intellectually wounded, they're going to respond with anger. And
Mm,
so I've always said that I can't really help someone deal with their anger until I help them deal with their pain.
mm,
So somebody insulted you, you're angry. Someone hit you, you're angry. You get up in the middle of the night and stub your toe. Anger is what you're going to feel. You touch a hot stove, the emotion that you feel is anger. And
mm.
so anger and pain walk hand in hand.
And
Now,
that's immediate too.
absolutely, it's immediate.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
immediate. And so it sounds like he was angry, which means somehow or another you hurt his feelings.
Yeah.
There was an emotional, intellectual, or physical injury that was going on. And so I mean, look, I'm on the phone right now with a lot of highly intelligent people, am I not? Yes. And so if someone comes along and questions your intelligence, tell me you don't get a little PO'd about that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so it's an intellectual injury. And going back to what you guys said about fear and about shame, there could definitely be elements of that fear experience or shame experience that are making you feel physically, emotionally, or intellectually wounded. When it comes to shame, I think it's kind of a intellectual, emotional kind of thing where you go like, I should have known better. How did I let myself do this? So it's still an injury, but it's almost like a self-inflicted injury,
Mm.
you know,
Hmm.
or like, well, I'm sure it happens countless times every single day where someone just says, something about coulda, shoulda, woulda, but they're saying it to themselves. And so they're going like, how can I do something so stupid? How did I not see this heading my way? And so that is most definitely one of the expressions of shame. But I think it really has that. If there's an anger element that is present, that means there's also somewhere in there an injury has happened. Thoughts
Yeah,
about
I
that?
can see that in this scenario because we were talking about, from a health literacy perspective, metabolic conditions. So he's been suffering from diabetes and obesity for so long, and he felt as if, after I talked to him after the call, he felt as if he's being told what to do, but people don't understand the context in which health is experienced from his perspective. And
Mhm.
that's a valid point because most physicians don't understand the context. So you go to the physician 12, 15 minutes, you go home,
Yeah,
but the 12 and 15 minutes is not meeting the need of his condition. And so he felt like, again, he's being talked to instead of someone talking with him.
right. And
And
so
so
that's
that
a,
pain, I can see that. Yeah.
yeah, oftentimes doctors have been accused of having a bit of a God complex. And along
Yeah.
with that God complex comes this behavior set, perhaps, where they
Mm-hmm.
are questioning the intelligence of their patient.
Mm-hmm.
They're questioning the value system of their patient. They're questioning the lifestyle of their patient. And while they may have content to share that would be useful to the patient to hear, it is in the packaging of that information that the injury is actually occurring.
Right. That's what I need to be more conscious of myself because I'm trying to actually help people in a different way than what the medical establishment offers.
Yeah,
And so I just need to be more conscious of how I'm packaging it so it's not coming across as, hey, I got it, you don't. You need to
right.
listen
And
up.
so now let's look at the other side of that because I said that's always two people are involved in this whole thing. What do you feel when these patients do not take your advice and come back?
I get angry
You
actually
get
because
angry. You get
yeah.
angry. So, what is the nature of the injury you've suffered? Is it a physical injury? Is it an emotional injury? Is it an intellectual injury? Bottom line is, all they did was didn't take your advice.
Yeah, but it's frustrating to see people. I'm always frustrated when I see people suffer like that.
Okay, what category do you think that would fall into? Is it an intellectual injury, emotional, physical, a combination of two or more? What do you think?
Emotional, mostly emotional, because I am highly sensitive.
Mhm.
So probably the emotions gets in the way most
So
often.
in what way does that decision not to take your advice hurt you?
Because it says it's almost, especially when they come at me like that, like, damn it, I'm doing the best I can do. It's like, first thing that came to my mind when he said that, and I remember writing in my journal about it, is I'm
Mhm.
not telling you something wrong. I'm offering you something that can help you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. All right. So you feel
So,
insulted, perhaps?
yes,
All right. That
yes.
would be an intellectual, maybe a little bit of an emotional injury. For everyone else on the
Hmm.
call, are you with me in what I'm exploring here with Brian? Yes, no. They don't want to upset you.
I am with UT on this. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Brian, you just have to kind of recognize that very often people who hold great passion for anything has this expectation that the rest of the world is going to see how obvious what they're saying really is. And if it's obvious, then why aren't they doing it? And if
Right,
they're not
right.
listening to you, so it's like this whole, it's almost like a battle of wits, a battle of will, or whatever, instead of realizing that every person has the divine right to do with their life whatever they choose. And what they choose to do is not necessarily a reflection on anyone else around them.
Right. And
And
interesting
so,
enough, this past April 7th was World Health Day. So
yeah,
April 7th commemorates the World Health founding back 76 years ago. And every year they have a theme. So last year was Health for All. This year is My Right, My Health. So there's
right.
literally 140 countries that has health. like written into their constitution, but it's a human right, a birthright kind of thing. So it's
Absolutely.
not just what the medical system says.
That's right. That's right. And so, if we really do believe this in this whole freedom thing, then maybe we just have to accept the fact that each individual is free to invite into their reality any level of risk they choose. So they are entitled to make whatever decision they make based on whatever they are prioritizing, et cetera. Now, yeah, I'd say, but if the person is a child, well, then we got to have some other kind of factors in there. So I'm talking about if someone has achieved adulthood, well, then what's this really all about? Why are we trying to control other people as opposed to simply offering them insights, tools, resources that may prove to be valuable to them if they choose to put those things into place.
Right, right.
And if
Yeah,
they
that's
don't
where
do
that
it,
conscious part comes in for me.
right. And if they choose not to do it, you, as a free individual, are welcome to say after the fact, what an idiot. But I would suggest to you that saying it to their face is not really going to, help your case if you're trying to.
No,
Go ahead,
no.
Tia.
That takes an awful lot on both sides, emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And I know if we can stay with asking questions, from my own perspective, that helps. But boy, in the moment,
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
it ain't
exactly.
necessarily so.
It ain't necessarily so. But I think what I hope you guys will take out of this is that you become more aware of when anger is starting to come up in you. And, it doesn't have to be something ballistic. There's always a subtle hint of anger that comes along. If you can learn to recognize that and examine whether or not what's going on with you that's causing this anger to happen, they didn't make you angry, right?
No,
They just
no.
did whatever they did, and your response or reaction to it, depending on where you're on the change grid, is owned by you.
Right,
So,
exactly.
so what is this injury, and is this an injury that is that? Now, I get it. If someone physically punches you, well, why do you think your brain, gives you a dose of anger?
Yeah.
Because it may very well be that anger is part of our survival mechanism.
Hmm.
So do we need to get angry in order to pay attention to something? So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know why anger, grief, fear, and shame are upgrade emotions, but I do know that anger, grief, fear, and shame are upgrade emotions. So that means that those emotions have been gifted to us because under a certain set of circumstances, those emotions could be exactly what you need to be feeling from whatever angle it happens to be. I'm throwing up survival just because that tends to be the upgrade, the worst case scenario in the upgrade plottings.
And I think T hit it spot on in terms of this emotional intelligence. And I remember, the cornerstone emotional intelligence is all about this idea of self-awareness. It's not, enough to just have an emotion. You have to know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And I think in scenarios like that, where I feel like I'm giving someone the best quality advisement, suggestions, whatever they want to call it that I can, and then it's rejected for whatever reason, I think it's about me letting go. I can ask the questions, but I should not be attached to that they're going to take it or they have to take it or any of that kind of thing.
Well,
That's when it
in
becomes a let
between
go.
those two, getting back to what T said, there is this opportunity for you to ask additional questions.
Right.
So if someone is going to be hesitant to take your advice, and you can detect their hesitancy long before they tell you to leave them alone, you could just say to them, tell me a little bit about what you're thinking and feeling about this situation or about
Right.
this piece of advice. Let them tell you what's going on. They may not even be able to answer that question because they've never given that any thought. So
Mhm.
I'll give you an example of this from now in my experience in the healthcare world. Yeah, when I was younger, when I was in college, I worked in a couple of different clinical settings, and I was working my way towards being a toxicologist. And so I worked at poison control centers, which happened to be inside of emergency rooms. And so you're looking at that kind of population when the, as far as who you're bumping into patient wise. So that's all I can kind of give you from my background. However, I was convinced that a great many people who are sick want to stay sick because it gives them something that they value greater than health. And that may very well be the attention. And this explains, I think, or this is demonstrated by both Munchausen and Munchausen by proxy.
Mhm.
So if you're doing it to yourself because you want the attention, then that's Munchausen. But if you're doing it to a child or another individual because you get pity and all that from other people, why would you want to get better?
Mhm.
You want to stay sick. And so we would need to probe and understand what is the benefit that you feel or you derive from staying sick?
Hmm.
And but I remember I wrote a speech for a client who was doing a big rally, and it was all about people making changes and taking control of their life. So, one of those things. And I gave him this line, and I said, ask them, how many of you are sick and tired of being sick and tired?
Mm.
And you get a real reaction when people start to realize I am sick and I am tired, and why am I staying this way? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Well, then change doesn't occur until someone says enough.
Yeah, enough.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm babbling, but you guys kind of get the idea. There's lots of reasons why someone may not follow through, and not all of them are a reflection on their assessment of your intelligence.
And
Right.
enough is the pain point, right?
Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah, enough is the pain point where they just say, all right, I have tolerated this as long as I'm going to tolerate it. Again, we go back to whatever you have in life, you have because you are either creating it or tolerating it. And so sooner or later, the situation becomes intolerable. And when it reaches that point, your head goes enough. And
Mm.
is at that moment, that's the threshold of activation.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. More thoughts about that you want to share, Tim? No? All good? All right. All right. So, go ahead, Tim.
I'm sorry, I missed your question, T.
I said, is there anything else you want to add about that idea that change occurs when people say enough? Have you observed that in your own life, in the life with your clients?
Yeah, and I think that that's when it has the potential to move folks out grid.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And but it could also move them maybe slightly down in terms of the thinking process and reflection of where that pain comes from,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
figure out what to do at that point.
Right. Now, and they may very well have never given that any specific thought before, as far as like describing it, identifying the contribute. They've never done that. They've just been feeling what they've been feeling. But at a certain point in time, that emotional state gets heightened enough where they just go, enough. And this happens in all sorts of human development practices where, like they say, people who have an addiction have to hit rock bottom. Well, hitting rock bottom is when you go, enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. Yeah, it's when the level of disturbance becomes no longer manageable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now the last thing I'd like to say about this one is that you really should get comfortable applying this at the individual level. So I ask you a generic question, but I think if you plugged in specific people or maybe smaller groups, respecting each other's need for personal space and boundaries. So you could plug in there, respecting my client's need for personal space and boundaries, respecting my spouse's need for personal space, respecting my friend, respecting my sibling, whatever. You can plug in there anything specific you want. And you may very well find that by making a list of, say, 12 people in your life, all about this one activity, you may find yourself scattered all over the change grid. Because again, it really is dictated by the person who's involved, the issue that's involved, the timing that's involved. We are in constant motion. So, yep. So I would encourage you guys to do that, particularly Brian, if you have certain people that just push your buttons and you push back. Right there, we're talking about boundaries. Pushing back against what? It's pushing back against some sort of an imposition, an infiltration, some overstepping, whatever it is. So you really could use this very effectively by being as specific as the case at hand merits.
I like that actually, because you get underneath, and that's what I like doing, like you like the assessments and what's underneath them. I like what's underneath this behavior. Like I get real scientific and, from Kathy's perspective, like take this anthropologic and sociologic kind of aspect of like, okay, what's going on in their environment? So I had a long conversation with the gentleman after that session, and that was helpful. But doing what you just suggested would bring to the light how I respond in different scenarios to different individual patient like population scenarios, and that could only enhance the awareness, I would think, for me. So that would be a great activity to do.
Well, and that gets back to the whole idea about emotional intelligence. As you get exposed to more and more, if you get exposed to opportunities to learn more and more about why people are responding the way they are, that exercises your, what do I say, range of emotional, I don't want to use intelligence again, but emotional awareness, understanding where those emotions are coming from, et cetera, et cetera. I'll give you an example of this. I like going to powwows. I don't know if you guys have ever had the opportunity to go to one, but they really
like a
are
real one.
What's a real one? Yeah, they're all over the place. I mean, well, I don't know if you're going to find one in South Africa, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's one or another, but certainly in the Western
But I
United
thought those
States.
are like for like a ceremonial thing. They allow outsiders, so to speak, to come in.
Sometimes I'm sure I'm sure we
Okay.
wouldn't know about the ones they do only.
Yeah,
for-
we have public powwows in Connecticut all the time.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
because
I
it's a
didn't
way of
know that.
creating awareness and harmony. But one of the things you may very well find interesting is that there are certain Native American tribes who, by tradition, by belief, by whatever, will not allow their blood to be drawn, because they believe that blood is what carries all of the history of their ancestors, and it gets passed on from one to another. So they believe that blood is life. And for you to take blood out of them or whatever is somehow or another pulling this life force out of them. There are others that refuse to allow their photograph to be taken, because they believe that image is taking part of their soul or whatever. Well, the people who don't have that opportunity to be exposed to those different ways of thinking and behaving are going to have, I think, less emotional range than the people who do. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. Who said that? I forget. Somebody.
Stephen Covey.
Yeah, but he's quoting somebody.
Oh, okay.
No, that phrase has been around long before Covey was been around, but I forget who it's attributed to. I first saw it long before Covey became anyone noteworthy. It's on the wall of the aquarium at Epcot in Disney World. That's on
Really?
it's in the aquarium, and it's like in tile on the wall. It says, "We must seek to understand before we seek to be understood."
Wow.
Like,
Okay.
I don't know why that's in an aquarium, but okay. It's a good phrase. I'll use it. So, okay. All right. Any other thoughts about this respecting each other's boundaries? Yeah. Now it's on this list because I think it is essential for any relationship that's really going to thrive, be mutually beneficial, we're talking about relationships that matter. Well, I think part and parcel to that relationship is this idea of mutual respect. Yep. Okay. So shall we move on to another one? Comments, questions? No? All right. Now here we go to the next one. Encouraging and supporting each other's personal growth. If it's a relationship that matters, well, what does that matter part translate into? I would imagine if that relationship matters, it's because it's bringing you certain things you consider valuable. So you're able to make a contribution, you're able to receive something, there's a mutual exchange of value going on there. And maybe one of the ones that's most commonly encountered is this idea about just encouraging and supporting each other's personal growth. So yeah, and we can talk about how that manifests, but let's see how y'all plotted on this one. Oh, of course, I get logged out. Oracle of the Self, fingerprint, there I am. Dashboard. Here it is, view change grid, choose the activity, security feature, but still feels inconvenient to me. So, well, it does, but I get it. We need to have that. So yeah. All right. So the ideal location for for supporting and encouraging each other's personal growth. I said, well, definitely a driver thing because those are actions. And I would say it's more of an expressive driver because, you're trying to encourage someone and support them. That feels to me like it translates into the kind of motivational, inspirational, those kinds of supportive sorts of behaviors will be there. Believing in the person, all that. That's why I think it's there. And it does take an analytical tertiary energy because you got to listen to what it is they're trying to accomplish when it comes to personal growth. It's usually personal growth in a particular life area or around a particular life situation, something like that. And so I do think that feels to me like a really good place to say that particular activity would be very well performed. Thoughts about that before we look at where you guys actually plotted? Yeah? No? Well, your grid shows that pretty much all of you feel like you've got sufficient ability to do it. Even individual D is only 1 point away from this, level I chose. But you guys are all further down grid. Now, the further down grid you go, that means you consider the task to be easier. And so when I look at the engagement rings, let's switch there for just a second. When I look at engagement rings, well, pretty much all of you, with the exception of individual A, David, is in full-blown engagement. Some of you even on the border of execution, but you're a little bit down grid around it, and only slightly. I mean, no one's in power apathy, or it's certainly not apathy, but it's in that southern half of power where things are starting to settle into routines. Now, they're not locked in place yet, but nevertheless, this feels like the puzzle has been solved. Now I'm just going to kind of support it, etc. Now, why do I have an issue with that I think would be worth talking about? But because I wonder if you performed an upgrade maneuver on yourself when it comes to being supportive and encouraging to others, might you be a little bit more supportive and more encouraging?
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably room for growth in that area.
Yeah, because I'm not
Yeah.
saying that good things aren't happening here. They are. You guys are. So as where you're plotting, you're saying, no, I am supportive and I am encouraging and all the good things when it comes to people I care about and the personal growth that they're pursuing. But moving that upgrade just a little bit could have a profound impact on that individual's personal growth. So when was the last time, for example, and again, like all these, if you were specific to the person rather than just the general assessment that we've been doing, you might find yourself plotting in umpteen different locations, depending on the person, the situation, and the timing. But I would say to you that as you move further and further down grid, you become less likely to make inquiries with that person about how they're doing. So if you
Mm.
know you've got a friend who's been working on goal whatever for a good long while, how often do you make their current status on that goal subject of conversation? Do you just allow it to come up as it naturally comes up, or do you make a deliberate attempt to say, "Tell me how you've been doing when it comes to blah blah blah"? How's that going for you?
Yeah, I probably need to spend more time in it. And I often feel guilty because, I'm traveling literally all around the world. And I think my time is somewhat constrained. I'm dealing with different time zones and that kind of thing. So I'm not in the same state of like scheduling the time because I feel tired at some point in time.
Yep, yep,
And
yep.
so I think more time is needed for me to really dive into that. Like when I think about the upgrade kinds of things of, waking some emotions and changing, increasing standards and those kinds of things, the time is probably the big one for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to build off of what Brian just said because I was thinking of time, but sometimes I think it's about the other person's time too.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And if that individual acts sort of in a hurry,
Yeah,
they don't want to give you much time, you don't pursue that
exactly. Yeah, you got to read the
relationship. And
right.
so but it could be my own interpretation too. So I think time on both sides is a critical thing, and I appreciate Brian bringing that up.
Yeah, I think it
Hmm.
is a good observation, but again, it leads us to an opportunity to ask a question. So I can recognize what I'm observing and say, seems like you're really got a lot of stuff on your plate right now. You're pressed for time or whatever. Tell me, how is that affecting your ability to focus on this personal growth item we talked about before? We don't need to talk about it now, but I think that's something that I'd love to hear from you about.
Hmm.
So something like that, because so many times people's personal growth is set aside because of higher tension activities that are going on.
Hmm.
And certainly, the higher your tension is, the perception of the availability of time gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And so, anyway, so there's an opportunity there. But let's kind of go back to the activity list for a second so you see our progression. We said, going back to number 8, spending meaningful moments together.
Hmm.
Well, I think that I'm looking at here is that when you have a meaningful moment together, don't let that meaningful moment be consumed by past grievances and talking about each other's flaws. We just respect their boundaries. We encourage their things. So I think this is happening during that meaningful moment, as opposed to if just by accident you find yourself talking to somebody and you perceive that they're under some big, time constraint or whatever, I would say to you, well, that's certainly not the time for you to even have a meaningful moment, right?
Hmm.
But maybe it's the time to say, I know you're busy right now. Sounds like you're just swamped. I want to really get together, set aside some time for us to just connect. And maybe, just maybe, you have an opportunity that they might say, "Oh, you're right. Wait, let me just take a quick breath. I can take 5 minutes." All right, good then. Then let's make those moments as meaningful as we can. And where does that meaning come from? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of answers to this question, but if I said to you, two of the biggest reasons why people communicate with one another are, I think, number one, to either share or receive information. So
Hmm.
there's a very practical side to communicating. But I think another big reason why people communicate is to connect and to have that sort of interpersonal um, experience that makes you feel like you're part of their life and they're part of your life. I'm sure there's plenty of other reasons why people connect, but I tend to think about those two. And this comes from one of the talks, by the way, that Diane Bufflin gives on the cruise ships about communication skills in general. But she says that men have a tendency to communicate, to solve a problem, share information, whatever it is. It tends to be more transactional, where women, for whatever reason, tend to communicate more to connect. And so, they like sharing their thoughts, feelings, etc. And no big conclusion has to come out of it, which is where she talks about the frustration between the genders. Because when if a woman, and again, I know these are generalizations, but you have to take in fact or into effect Diane's generation, and that she speaks from that generation. So I'm sure this would not be something you would share with a modern audience without expecting some serious pushback. But that being said, we're here to talk about all different sorts of possibilities. So I can say to you that if a woman wants to connect and she brings up something to a guy, she probably shouldn't be surprised to find out that he wants to know what's wrong and how can he fix it. And, and if he's asking for a specific piece of information, don't be surprised if he doesn't want to hear the whole backstory. So can you guys relate to that? Or
That's the premise of men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
there we are. There we are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure, that would be a text that would probably be frowned upon in today's world. But that doesn't make it any less true. So may not apply all the time, but I think it applies often enough that there's merit to understanding what that dynamic may be.
Right.
And whether that dynamic is genetic or simply a matter of how people have been accultured, well, whatever. That's another wonderful part of the conversation. Where did this come from? But nevertheless, if the pattern exists, recognizing, understanding, and utilizing that pattern could be useful to whatever the issue is that someone's trying to deal with. Particularly if you're doing relationship counseling, are you not supposed to say he just wants an answer to his question and she just wants to talk? Oh, so then that allows the guy to say, all right, so you're not expecting me to have this big answer readily available to you. And you go, no. In fact, she may very well say, I already know what I'm going to do.
This is interesting because I wonder, my older brothers were out of the house, so I was raised with my 6 sisters, and it always drove me crazy when people don't spend quality time in the communication. Like my father's thing was about like short sentences, very authoritarian kind of thing, and it always rubbed me the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when, after my wife and daughter's accident, I became a foster parent. That's one of the things I did with the foster care kids was make sure that, when I'm talking to them, I'm not looking at a phone or watching TV. I'm listening intently. And I remember they bought me this shirt, and I still have it from like over 20, from years now, that says, the best gift you can give a child is your time.
Yes.
And it has like the man with these kids around him and a soccer ball, and he's just sitting down, like talking to them, like listening to them. And I still have this shirt, like it's worn out, but I won't throw it away.
Exactly. And so you've just given us an example. Your dad was more transactional in his
Very transactional.
And are your sisters more conversational, or are they more practical, or are they wanting to just connect?
They're bossy.
Okay. It's because you just don't listen, Brian.
Exactly.
There you go. There you go. So, take the gender element out of it, and maybe we could just say some people are far more focused on communication for practical purposes, and others are far more interested in communication for the connection side of things. I think that we can make room for in today's world. Okay, so now again, you could apply this to each individual and maybe get something really insightful around how it changes from one person to another. But anyone want to throw anything out before I look at the grid itself?
I think what T talks about often in terms of asking better questions fit here as well, because you would need to have context of this kind of personal world. Sometimes it's just not going to be obvious just from the conversation. You might be observing something, that you want to understand better. So you ask better questions, and that gives you more of the context.
Yeah, well, and I think this is years and years ago that we did this program, but it was about the power of questions. And
Mhm.
I wanted to kind of show to people that um, asking the right questions is far more powerful than giving the right data.
Right. Mm.
And so the way that I did it was that I divided the audience into two groups, and these were all human development professionals of various ilks. And I said, you all have a piece of paper, read the paper, do not share it with people on the other side of the room. So I said, you are working with a couple. And I even said, you know, if we had time, we could have someone be that couple. But I just said you're only talking to one of the two people. So the scenario was you've got a couple that are at odds with one another, and they are at a crossroads thinking about divorce versus reconciliation. And so I said to one side of the room, no one heard this. This was just in a little piece of paper that this person that they were talking to as the center of the exercise, the fishbowl, the person in the fishbowl, you can only ask them questions, but you need to make sure that by the time the questioning period is over, they have decided to divorce. And on the other side of the room, I would say, you need to only ask questions. You have to make sure that by the end of your questioning period, they've decided to reconcile. And when all this was over and done with, I said to the audience by a show of hands, how many of you were successful at achieving the outcome you had in mind? And every hand went up. So they were darn close to 100% successful in leading people just through questioning to a particular outcome. Now,
Wow.
in our real work, because what we went through from there, I said, now that you know the power of asking questions, you need to look at the ethics of the questions you are asking. And
Mm.
so, are you asking questions to steer somebody in a particular way? Or are you asking questions purely to open up understanding what is behind your questioning? And that was what the real purpose is. So I said, yeah, questions are very, very powerful things. Therefore, you have to be very thoughtful about the questions you are asking.
Mhm.
So for all the rest of you that are on the call, I know T, you talk a lot about question. I know Kathy, you do as well. What are your thoughts around questions? Linda, you just unmuted, so yeah. Go.
Well, I just use, I think after being with Mary Lee Goldberg Adams and with her book, Change Your Life, Change Your Question. Oh no, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life.
Yeah.
You just reiterated that. And it changed their lives. Like Einstein says, give me 55 minutes. If I have to make a decision in an hour, give me only questions.
Yeah,
Mm.
right.
And it'll open up new doors and new thinking.
Yep.
If it's done in the particularly, and if other people ask you questions or you want them to think of questions, do it in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
How will I change? What will I do?
Mm-hmm. How will I respond? Yep, exactly. Now, on the flip side of things, right now there's this, what do I say? Historic trial is happening. Well, when attorneys are asking questions, do you think they're asking questions in order to simply reveal information or to steer?
Just steer.
To steer, because what's their job?
They're trying to win the case for their client.
Right. What's the judge supposed to be doing? If the judge is going to ask questions, what should the judge be doing?
Should be trying to moderate that, like making
Well, but
it.
the judge is asking questions. What's the intention in a good judge's question?
He's trying to keep people on track.
And get the information as opposed to steer.
Right.
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 So yeah, I mean, the judge is there to make sure that the rules are being followed, but sometimes the judge will ask a question, and we can only hope that the judge's question is more about making sure that information is conveyed in a clear kind of way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, anyway, that's power questions. And again, going back to your guys' grid, you're showing yourself as having very good skill to that. But I would suggest to you that when it comes to, and again, this activity as stated is encouraging and supporting each other's growth, your plotting would indicate that you could put just a little bit more energy into doing this stuff deliberately, as opposed to letting it unfold naturally. The further down grid you go, the more you assume things are fine and that things are on track and things are going well. You might even hold the belief that if something was off track or not going well, they would bring it up to you. They would share it with you. I think that that's an assumption that needs to be explored. Edie, you've unmuted. What would you like to share?
Yeah, I was just thinking there was a guy, what was his first name? Schwartz. And I think it was a guy at the Menninger clinic where they stuck a rusty needle through his arm, and with the powers of mind, he didn't have any infection. But anyway, he said at the moment of indecision, that the answer is already within us. We're either blocking it, we're afraid of what it's going to do, we'll have to take action. So I think when you ask questions, don't you think it's almost like the reticular activating system goes on a search and retrieves the answers we already know, but we don't know we know. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I kind of think of it like we talk about the oracle of the self. Far more often than not, the answer is already within. But are you hearing the answer that's already within? Are you listening to that voice that's inside of you? And so I like to think that when you're asking good quality questions, you're just becoming that voice inside of the person's head, posing a question that they really should be asking themselves, but it isn't being asked for whatever reason. So,
right. But the brain definitely does process questions uniquely different than a statement.
That's right.
So like if you sit your keys down and you're looking for your keys right in front of you and you say something like, I just had my keys, they're right here, was evident they're not there. You're limiting yourself. Whereas to Edie's point with the RAS, reticular activation system, you say, where did I last leave my keys? Now your brain goes searching for this pattern of behavior.
Well, in the nature of change, we talk about that the human mind is powered by questions. And so, hopefully you're asking yourself good questions, but other people are asking you good questions. But that's why, again, and I've given this example countless times, when we hear a twig snapping behind us, what's the immediate question that's popping into our heads? What's that noise? What does it mean? Am I in danger? Blah, blah, blah. And so the human mind is tormented by unanswered questions. And it will always seek out an answer just to kind of get it off of the list. So the joke I always make is if we're having a conversation about whatever, and I say to you, what color was your very first bicycle? Or what color is your toothbrush? It's amazing how you can move on to the conversation, then pause a moment later and say, how many of you actually answered those questions in your head? Okay, why? Why did you bother answering those questions? They're totally insignificant to what the conversation at hand happens to be. And it's all just because the mind is always seeking answers. So that's how it goes.
You know, what I was also thinking of was, when you're trying to think of a name and it's like on the tip of your tongue and you say, you know what, let's go on with our conversation. And probably within 5 minutes, I'll blurt out the name. And you do.
It'll come to you. Right. The human mind is tormented by an unanswered question.
Yeah, it keeps thinking about it, whether you move on or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, we have to ask these questions. So again, behold the power of questions. We do have one activity left that I'd like to finish up so we can move on to our next exploration. So let's just quickly go over to that one. This is staying dedicated and faithful to each other through thick and thin. Let's see what that one looks like. Now, wow. And so you guys are the kinds of friends I'd like to have. Because look at it, we're saying if you really want to stick together through thick and thin, there is work that's involved. And we're putting that as the ideal location at a 10-10. Which means you see that there's plenty of challenge, because if there's thick, there's a challenge, and you want to have the ability to stay together, to continue to support and guide one another. And so it's interesting to me that the ideal location is pretty much about to be eclipsed by the average location. And so this bodes very, very well. Individual C is willing to go fight for you. So as far as, supporting one another, this is support to the point where they'll say, I'll take a bullet for you. You know, and so if we were thinking about, your children, your most significant relationships, you might say, there is no set of circumstances under which I will let this person be harmed in any kind of way. Well, we know that in the outgrid danger zone, as much as we malign it, the truth is that we have these behaviors available to us because under certain circumstances, they may prove to be absolutely vital. And so this idea about defending someone, protecting them, fighting their battles, etc., when it comes to sticking by one another through thick or thin, that could very well be called upon at certain kinds of times. With me on this, so everyone's really plotting in a good location. But yeah. All right. Any questions, comments about why that needs to be as far outgrid as it is? I mean, again, ideally, you're on the border. If I switch back to the regular composite change grid, it's plotting right there on the border. But
I think it's your verb that makes the huge difference, or your adjective, the fierce,
Yep. And I think that's it. Hopefully we don't have to get into this kind of very outgrid sort of response. But the situation may arise where you go ahead and you do whatever it is that has to be done. And I'll give you an example of this. Any of you that are involved with kinds of clients where intervention is required, and maybe that intervention has to do with some sort of self-destructive behavior, you may very well come along and say, I know it's going to be one of the most challenging things I've ever done, but I've been well prepared to handle this discussion. Then you're out here where this is tough love. This is no way around it. Do this or else kind of a thing. There does exist certain sets of circumstances where being that far outgrid is actually warranted. By the way, Brian, talking about people giving you pushback, do you think that the individual who's been sucked into an intervention is likely to display some pushback?
Yeah.
And that's it, because right, they're going to get angry because they feel injured. They feel judged by people. So there is this going on, and yet they're going to fight. And you need to be ready if the situation warrants, and that's exactly how you respond.
Right.
Now
I'm surprised I'm not out there, actually.
Well, and even the people who are out there, who are interventionists, if you will, preface the discussion that's about to happen, because usually the person who's having the intervention is walking into an environment not knowing who all is going to be there. But the moment they see who's sitting there, they go, uh-oh, and they may very well turn and run. But this is the individual, the interventionist is there to create a safe environment and say, we're all here because we all love you. We're all here because we all care very much about you. And so they have to make sure that the intervention itself is preceded by and followed by that emphasis on where they're all coming from. This is all about love, because you also may often say to them, if we don't intervene in the way we're intervening, then I promise you the law enforcement system and the judicial system are going to do their own intervention, and it's not going to be packaged and presented in a loving and caring way. Right. And so anyway, there you go.
That's good. The old tribal way of intervening here for Zulu nations, I'm in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the province of Durban. So when someone does something wrong or so-called bad, they form this circle around the individual, and all the members of the family and even community are all telling that individual the good things that they've seen and the good things that they remember. So they remind them the good things, not the bad.
Yep.
To bring them to a state. And then that conversation is like they say in the Caribbean, come walk with me. That's
Right.
when that occurs after.
Right. And so that's what we're talking about when it comes to being a skillful interventionist or mediator. It depends on how hostile what you're doing the mediation around is, coming into the whole thing. But it may very well be something that requires this level of, what do I want to say, focus, determination, whatever it is that the good parts are out here. I know most of the adjectives out here are on the surface very negative, but again, I believe this with every fiber of my existence. The only reason why we as humans have that response available to us is because under a given sort of circumstances, it may be perfect. So yeah, I don't want to dwell there though, but you get the idea. So again, this is not something that we would spend a lot of time exploring because the population is plotting quite well. Now, individual E is plotting their ability as being 2 points lower, but they still see plenty of challenge. And so maybe this would be the person who needs to just be equipped a little bit with some other skills to help them better prepare to stick with somebody through thick and thin. They might be going like, I don't know how to stick with this person in this situation at this point in time.
That's me. I mean, I've been sticking with them for a long, long time. So
Yep. But for whatever reason, you've reached a bit of a limit to your tool set. And so maybe, just maybe, if we could provide some additional tools, okay, fine, that would do it. Now, Kathy, is that you? Okay, so Kathy's E.
yeah.
Yeah, so Kathy, this is not, I'm going to believe this is not a general plotting as much as you had someone in mind.
I don't know what I was thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. I feel like that is who I am, that I am extremely loyal. I am
Yep.
extremely loyal to my husband, my friends. And so I kind of see it as a way of life. I stay with those friendships through thick and thin. So I didn't see it as a fighting for.
Well, good.
I
No,
saw
that's
it
good.
more of a way of life.
Yeah, and I like that plotting because where you're plotting is you're fully engaged. Look where you're plotting as far as the engagement rings go. But
Yeah.
this border between the amiable driver and the expressive driver, this tends to be the domain of the diplomat.
Yeah.
So it is a very supportive kind of a place. This ideal location here being this far out grid is, of course, just based on my thing, but I'm saying like, it's not so much when things are thin, because things tend to be, it's pretty easy to support somebody when things are thin. It's when things get thick that you go like, all right, if I'm really going to do this activity best, what do I need to be prepared, ready, willing, and able to do? And that's why I chose this. So be the centurion a little bit. So yeah. Thoughts about that,
Very
Kathy?
nice.
I mean, I've been there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've already been there. And so, maybe it's just the evolution of over time, but I don't know. I feel like
Well,
I've
and
already,
I like the way that you just said that, is that you've been there, because it may very well be that when we are in a situation where we're trying to stay loyal through thick and thin, that we do start off with this real, I'm going to support and defend the person who needs my support and defense. But at a certain point in time, you kind of go like, you know what, they can really fight their own battles. So I'm going to back off a little bit. So it's not necessarily that you're here and need to move that way or out grid. It may very well be that you've already spent some time out grid and you've recognized that in whatever those situations are, you just need to be there, ready to be supportive. Maybe there's nothing really challenging happening in that person. So again, everyone just remember, movement on the change grid is constant. And we're looking at a plotting like this. We don't know where they're coming from or going to. We only know where they are. And so if we're working individually, if I was having private conversations with Kathy, I may very well explore, tell me some stories about this. And so have you ever had something put to the test where you had to stay dedicated and faithful because things got well, thick based on these two words, thick and thin. I don't know, Brian, do you use that phrase? Thick and thin, or is that not?
No, I never heard it actually.
Yeah, this is a very common phrase in American English. Sticking with somebody through thick or thin. It means good times or bad. You're just going to stay with them. So yeah, good
I
times.
did look it up.
Yeah, did you? Yeah, 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 it's very interesting.
I
Okay,
asked
anyway.
ChatGPT, are you familiar with thick and thin?
Yeah, well, we got lots of these little phrases that make sense to all of us because we were, it's just we've been raised to just know what that means. But yeah. Okay, so any other comments, questions about this activity or about anything we've covered in building relationships that matter?
And this is really good. I'm always impressed with the activity list itself. Like these are kind of spot on things I think that are absolutely needed to be focused on if you're going to build a relationship.
Yeah, if this is the life situation, building relationships that matter. Certainly, there are probably 1,200 activities that are involved, but these 12, I think, give us a good overview and a good foundation on which to launch discussion. So hopefully you'll feel the same way about the next activity list, which you guys can expect to receive on Friday. I do want to give it to you with plenty of time to fill out the profile, but I don't want it to be sent too soon and then it gets set aside till you've got time to really get it done. So from attention management perspective, usually we're dealing with a 72-hour window of opportunity. So on Friday, you will learn what the new life situation is and you'll see the activity list. So please, please, please take a few moments to fill it out. So we've got something interesting to look at as we're having these discussions. So with
Absolutely.
that, thank you all very much for joining in and have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Have a good day.